Thanks, Wade, for the great introduction. Like you said, my name is Carrie. I've worked with STCU for 4 years now. I started out at the bottom of the totem pole as a teller, and I've worked my way up. Most recently, I worked as a loan officer floating around at our branches. So some of you, I see a couple familiar faces that I met from the benefits fair and possibly out and about in the community. But currently, I'm on a 6-month assignment learning how to do this role. So this role primarily is financial education and just working closely with the community and filling needs in regards to finances and our community. So along with me today is Eric. He actually does this role full-time, and he's been a fantastic mentor to me, and so he may also be a familiar face for you going forward since this is his territory. So first thing I want to point out today is the workbooks that you have on your desk and just familiarize you with the content inside. I know with the layout of this room, it might be hard for some of you to see the screen. So in here is actually a packet of all the slides. I know the text is a little small. If you have any questions at any point in time, I do invite you to go ahead and just raise your hand and ask. This is as much a discussion and for you as it is for me, so feel free to raise your hand. Also in this packet is a couple of handouts on the right-hand side. They're just tools to go along with the discussion that we're going to have today. So a couple budgeting tools and then a printout just talking about money buckets, which is a concept that it thoroughly describes and is a budgeting tool as well. Something that's kind of special today that we don't normally include in these packets is this little green packet, and the reason that we included it in your folder is because recently Wagstaff has signed up to be a community business partner. So what that means to you is that for anyone in this room, I know we have a lot of folks who are already members, but for any who might not be, Wagstaff is now offering you free membership to STCU. So that's a great value. And part of that, we also get to come and teach these financial workshops. This one, Budgeting 101, is just the first in a series of several of them. So hopefully we'll be able to go through some more topics that range from just a basic broad overview all the way to some more in-depth topics such as protecting your credit score and preventing fraud and identity theft. So lots of information here. Feel free to review it. Also at the end, we're going to go ahead and I'll prompt you towards the end to go ahead and fill out these review forms. These really help me. So if you have any feedback, please feel free to share it. I like to learn. And we'll also be using these to draw for some prizes at the end. So we appreciate that. Okay, so just some overall objectives for this workshop. The big one is discussing why budgeting is important. Who here gets kind of nervous or cringy at the word diet? Is anybody? Yeah, I know that word it has a negative taste in your mouth, and budgeting, it's a great analogy, it's a great comparison because budgeting is a lot of the same thing. I'm going to argue that I think that most people in this room have probably worked with budgeting as a concept. It's probably not a new concept for a lot of you. So a lot of this is just kind of that motivational and filling in the learning gaps or knowledge gaps. So a lot of these, why it's important is going to be maybe things that you haven't thought of or things that haven't just been stated in precise words. Another big thing is discovering where you are right now, and that will really determine what you're going to take from this workshop, and maybe if you have questions relating to that. Learn the importance of financial goals and setting smart financial goals. Discovering the 5 specific steps to creating a spending plan. And I'm just going to let you know, because of that whole word and the negative connotation that kind of comes with words like dieting and budgeting, we call it a spending plan. And I'm going to use those two words interchangeably. They mean the same thing, but really with a spending plan, you're creating a lifestyle change. So that's the goal here. Once you've created your spending plan, we're going to learn how to manage a spending plan and then set goals to put your spending plan into action. The first thing, importance of creating a budget. Finances are the number 1 stress factors for adults. There's a lot of ways that a budget or problems with a budget can impact you negatively. It can create stress, it can create guilt, it can create problems at home with your marriage, or problems with achieving your big overall goals, such as attending college if maybe you don't qualify for financial aid, and can create a bad situation or an even worse situation for you. So a big reason, this is kind of an interesting topic. I come from a financial institution, and I don't know if a lot of you know this, but a lot of the money that we earn comes from debt, from loans that people carry. I'm here talking to you about avoiding debt because to us it's really important. In our community, this is a really big stress factor, a big need in our community to kind of talk about this a little bit. You know, when you don't have a budget with proper planning, you aren't setting yourself up to pay for those expenses, which often leads to breaking out the credit card and maybe swiping for things. So you can budget to avoid debt. So I know that, especially for me, I'm a student, I'm a college student, I have a lot of student loans. So I have to carefully budget to not just avoid future debt, but also to pay down debt that I already have. The average credit card debt of those who carry a balance is $15,355. That is a lot of money. If you add in households that don't carry a balance, that average balance goes down to about $7,000, which is still quite a bit. So budgeting to avoid debt is a great way to avoid that altogether, or even just reduce the occurrence of it. Some statistics about how it relates to health, and this really ties in really well with what your Human Resources Department is helping or aiming to do right now, which is improving your overall fitness, your overall health, your overall happiness. And so our hope is that by bringing some of these tips to you, you can help not only increase the health side of things, but also the stress and the anxiety and the other things that come with it. People with high stress are twice as likely to have a heart attack. That is crazy. Out of people with financial stress, these are some of the symptoms that people are reporting. That's a pretty strong, they say correlation is not causation, but those are some pretty strong numbers. So especially when you look at it from a big picture, a lot of people are probably getting that sick to the stomach feeling from maybe some stress or anxiety that they've got coming up and that kind of thing. And a lot of that can be helped by just taking some time to sit down and plan ahead for it. So in discovering where we are right now, I have some questions, kind of like a checklist. You don't have to volunteer any information, but do you spend more than you make? Expect major life changes soon? Think marriage, buying a house, having additional family members, things like that. Do you pay yourself last? This is a big one, especially with folks who have employers who offer retirement options. That's a great way to pay yourself first. Rely on credit cards to make purchases, especially unexpected ones. Think about having an emergency fund, but fail to actually have one or implement a plan for one. Spend uncontrollably, and do you consider your retirement? I know that my generation, a big focus right now is to teach about retirement, and interest rates are kind of low right now, and so it makes it more important than ever to really plan and save and create that budget to be able to retire, because I don't want to work forever. But here's some kind of average statistics of spending and kind of a good gauge of how you can improve yourself and a good baseline. So average American spends $94 a day, which is about $35,000 a year. Obviously, this is a pretty general statistic and relies a lot on what you make. But spending habits really directly affect budgeting, so that's why we're going to talk a lot about that. Only 30% of Americans have prepared a long-term financial plan, and this goes along with those financial goals. So having a long-term financial plan, it might not necessarily, I don't know if you've heard the term or the phrase, no plan survives initial contact, but it's true. But just having that plan really helps alleviate some of that stress and some of those unknowns, and you can kind of make decisions to keep yourself on track. And only 32 people actually actively track their spending. And we're going to talk a lot about this later, but tracking your spending is definitely the first step in this whole process. And we'll talk about why. 47% of people could not afford a $400 unexpected expense. This is in this area, there's a lot of people who are affected by this. I don't know if any of you have had an all-wheel drive vehicle, but I have two. And if you damage a tire, oftentimes you can't replace just the one tire. You have to buy all four, which is more than $400 usually. But you know, that's a huge unexpected expense, and it's a really common one in this area, and it's just one example. But a lot of folks, when they're faced with something that's completely unexpected like that, the first thing that they do is break out the credit card. By budgeting and planning ahead for these kinds of expenses, you really alleviate a lot of the stress and anxiety that comes with it, such as, oh no, what if I popped a tire? What am I gonna do? Then you're gonna have a backup plan, something to fall on to take care of that expense. 3 basic principles of a budget. Like I said, the big one, first step is tracking your spending. Second step is setting your financial goals and creating a spending plan or a budget. So in your packets, I included, there's 2 different types of budgeting tools, and there's not really a right or wrong way to do a budget or to track your spending. Some people prefer paper, some people prefer spreadsheets, some people prefer using online banking, some people prefer like third-party apps. You know, I'll just throw out a couple examples, Mint or online banking budgeting tools, things like that. But the important thing is just actively tracking your spending. And how far you go tracking your spending is completely up to you. But just the act of actually looking at your purchases changes behavior. Part of it's the accountability portion of it. Part of it is just being more aware. And then there's always that little bit of decision process when you pull out your debit card and you want to go buy something that maybe is a habit, more of a habit than a need or a want. And then you start rethinking, do I actually want to take the time to write this down in my journal? And sometimes just that can be enough to dissuade you of buying something that maybe is more of a habit purchase than a need or a want. But when you're tracking your income and expenses, get a plan of how long you need to track to get an idea of where your budget is. And we're going to talk a little bit more about spending leaks, but they're a big one. And that's what you identify when you're doing this tracking process, is finding your spending leaks. So as you're tracking your spending, you can think about, okay, I made this purchase. Is it a need? Is it a want? Is it a miscellaneous household item? You know, where does this fall, and do I really need it? And if I had to do it all over again, would I still buy this? That's kind of the thought process that goes through when you're doing this tracking. Again, there's lots of tools. If you're not a paper person and having to actually sit and write something down is a deal breaker for you, that is just fine. There are lots of good resources. I know our online banking automatically tracks and categorizes purchases, and there's lots of other systems that do as well. So, you know, look out for those tools. Oftentimes they're free, so definitely take advantage of them. This will really help you when you're creating your spending plan, especially when you have a life change and you have to start making cuts, because you've already categorized it. You already know what's a need. You already know what's a want. You already kind of have an idea of how much you spend, and it really takes the mystery out of it. And that's the part that causes, at least me personally, the most anxiety. So kind of a funny story on this. This is kind of a side note. When I first started doing lending with the credit union, they actually sat us in a room, the new loan officers, and they had us do a little exercise. Dad, of this fictional scenario, Dad worked at a machine shop or something similar, and he had great benefits. He had long-term disability, whatnot, and Mom was a stay-at-home mom. Dad got injured and had to stay home, and suddenly their budget was only 60% of what because that's what their long-term paid, is 60% of your income. So then in this exercise, what us loan officers had to do was then take their budget, and we were given a full breakdown similar to, do you mind if I borrow this? Just a sec. Similar to this, and we had to take 60% of their income and decide, now what do I cut? And especially when you're planning for someone else's budget. And the results were kind of scary. Even a loan officer who understands financial concepts, who knows that we should be paying ourselves first, who knows, we have needs and wants and things like that. One of the first things that a lot of the loan officers cut was paying themselves first. One of the other things that they cut was the emergency savings, which was really kind of a scary thing, because when we sat down and had the conversation, kind of at the end of it, the grading period, you might say, the first thing that the instructor said was, "I'm sorry, but that wasn't the best recommendation. Here's what we would have recommended." And then they showed an amended budget, which showed, less allocations to some of the miscellaneous expenses and whatnot. But just kind of an interesting, even people who are in finance and know a lot of these concepts, I know a lot of this isn't new, but it's just phrasing it in a way that maybe brings more thought to it, and maybe it'll stick a little bit more. If there's anything that you take away from this workshop, I would like it to be this, because just the act of doing this and nothing else, you'll likely see changes, and that's exactly what we hope for. So after you've started tracking your spending, and you've gotten your spending diary or whatever your process is going on, this is one of the examples that's in your folder. This is, we actually brought a few of these. Like I was saying, we have evaluation forms, and at the end, we'll go ahead and collect all those from you. We're gonna use those forms to draw for prize. We're gonna be giving a few of these away, as well as gift cards. So, and this allows you to track for up to 1 year with little motivational, cute little motivational quotes and everything. So once you've gotten your tracking down, you should have a good idea of what you're spending your money on, and that's a big part of it. You should have an idea of maybe what you would do differently, what's really important, and paying yourself first, paying your bills first, and then kind of what comes after that. And maybe you can set some priorities or some goals or things like that. So with the financial goals, you should have some short-term goals, which is within the next 6 months. So maybe this might be preparing for an expense, maybe a repair on your vehicle, or a small vacation or staycation, or maybe even just paying a credit card off. I know that's been one of my recent goals, because I actually, in the example of the tires, I actually ran over a screw right on the sidewall. They couldn't patch it, brand new set of tires, and I didn't take the warranty. So I had to pay $1,100 for a new set of tires. So that's an example of one of my short-term financial goals. Then you have your 1 to 5, maybe it's buying a house or moving or whatever it might be. And then a long-term, more than 5 years. So maybe it might be retirement, or who knows? I'll leave that up to you. When we talk about setting goals, it's really important that you have a SMART goal. I don't know if any of you have heard that term before. It's a really common phrase, but make sure your goal is specific. Don't just say, well, I want to save for a vacation. What kind of vacation do you want to save for? Where do you want to go? Or maybe if it's a hobby, I have a really expensive hobby, you guys. I race cars, like actual cars, race cars. My next ridge is at the Ridge, which is over in Kent, and it's $1,000. It's a lot of money. So, a lot of my goals are very specific, planned out. If I can't meet my goal, I don't go. So that's a very specific goal. It's measurable, $1,000 entry fee. It's adjustable. If I decide maybe I don't want to do that race, I'll do something else with that money instead, or maybe I hurt my leg or something and I can't race, so maybe I'll have a little spa day. I don't know. But keep it flexible. If your goal doesn't end up working out, reallocate that money. Realistic. I'm not a NASCAR driver. I can't go buy a $500,000 car, as much as I wish I could. So keeping it realistic and time-oriented. If you say, oh, I'm going to do it, but maybe I'll just start it tomorrow or next year or next quarter or when I get my tax returns. Doing that is kind of in the same way of paying yourself less, because you're basically saying it's not a priority and I haven't really set a deadline. And I don't know about you guys, but I am kind of a procrastinator, and when I have a deadline, I'm much more motivated to achieve that deadline the closer that deadline gets. So that's a SMART goal. So once you've done all the tracking your spending and you've created some goals, you have kind of a finishing point, when I get to this point, I'll have accomplished my goal. Now you create the plan to get there. We call it a blueprint because it's adjustable. Maps are kind of rigid. We don't call it a map, a roadmap to your plans or your goals. We call it a blueprint because it's flexible. You change it to meet your needs. If you decide you want to add some features later, go for it. It's your blueprint. You do with it what you want. Consider what you're already doing and what you may want to change. And this can be a collaborative process too. So, those that have significant others and have other people to plan for as well, you can adjust your goals as your direction changes, or maybe to accommodate a change in heart or whatnot. But the two key components of your spending plan are income and expenses. And of course, that's really simple. You know, of course, what else are you going to do with a spending plan? But I'll go into more detail why it's really important to be really thorough with the income and the expenses. Overall, when you're sitting down and creating your spending plan, there's five different steps that you really want to be mindful of. List all income sources. I see it a lot that a common thing is people say, oh, well, this is my side money, it's my mad money, so I don't include it in the budget because it's already spent and I just like to, spend it on petty cash stuff or maybe frivolous stuff, so I don't include it in the budget. My recommendation is to include it. Include both the money that you're getting and what you want to spend it on, and include it in your budget. Because if you're not willing to include it, it can, A, you're not entirely being honest with, your income and whatnot. But B, if something happens down the road, you might forget that income is there and part of your assets or part of your resources. And, you might miss a good opportunity to solve a problem or, fix a spending leak or whatnot if you're not including everything in there. You want to have a good comprehensive view when you sit down and look at everything. Determine where your money goes. Really difficult to do that if you don't track your spending. I can't tell you to the penny how much money I spent on coffee last month, but I can tell you it was between $104 and $106, which is a lot of money to spend on coffee, but at least I know where it went, right? So if I ever hit an emergency, I know that next month I could save that money by not spending it on coffee and soda and that kind of stuff. Balance income and expenses. This is important and it sounds silly, but if you've listed this much income and only this much expenses and no set plan for what you're going to do with the rest of that money, a lot of us end up logging back into the checking account a couple weeks later and going, oh my gosh, my balance is a lot lower than I thought it was. Happens to me when I don't sit down and create a thorough plan. So if you have that gap, make sure you create a plan for that money. Because if you don't create a plan, oftentimes you find it getting spent a little more freely than maybe you anticipated. Make it work for you. So a big thing, if you've got your budget and maybe you have a really expensive TV bill, but you never sit down and actually watch TV. That's a great example. I actually had to make that cut and just go to subscription type services because I never am home to watch my TV. And anytime I sit down and turn the TV on, was paying like $200 a month for it. And it's always commercials, But that's just an example. There may be other aspects of your budget that maybe aren't working for you. There might be other things you want to do with that money. And then manage your system. This is really important because once you've created your budget, if there's no follow through, you did all that work to just have it be a stack of papers. But so when I'm saying list all income sources, a really common example is income tax returns or bonuses or side income. Maybe a neighbor said, hey, can I get help with this XYZ project? I'll give you $100. Happens to me a lot, actually. Gifts, all sorts of stuff. But you want to make sure you're including these in your budget, even if they're not necessarily recurring or consistent amounts, even if you can guesstimate or find out how much you got last year as a whole and just average it, it'll really help with your planning because, like I was saying, it's easy to forget that you have that kind of stuff coming up and that you can use it to solve problems with your budget. Determining where your money goes. How do you spend your money now? You can review your spending diary and kind of look through a lot of spending leaks. Sometimes we don't realize the volume that you're spending across a month or even a year or even a 5-year span until you really sit down and look at the numbers. I have a really funny story to tell you when you get to the spending leak part. It's kind of eye-opening. But again, the same concept of would you do something different with it? Because without asking yourself this question, it's really hard to come up with change. With those expense categories, when you're kind of listing all of your stuff, you know, obviously we've already talked about this, but is it a need? Is it a want? Is it kind of a splurge item, or miscellaneous? I do have a note of caution with that miscellaneous is don't use it as a catch-all, because then you spend tons of money trying to categorize everything and whatnot. Really, miscellaneous should be an unplanned expense, something that's not like a recurring, something that you never do, you don't really have another place to put it. You know, and these are all subjective based on the person. Some of you needs might be, you know, like I work in an industry where I have to dress nicely. So nice clothing is more of a need than a want for me, because I can't come in coveralls as much as I wish I could. I have plenty of them. Whereas wants for me might be having rugged clothing. I don't really have a need for it, but I like it. Anyways, this is really important when you're doing your budget, and really kind of evaluate each thing that you're spending big money on, because you never know, you might find that, you know, maybe this wasn't really working for me after all. And finding a balance in your spending, and we already kind of talked about this too. If you're finding that you have created a budget and you've got all this income and yet your expenses don't really match what you're seeing as far as how much you have left over, it's kind of time to go back and adjust some changes, make some changes to that budget, and maybe find things that you were spending money on that weren't included, or maybe money that you had stashed away and forgotten about. That happens too. And of course, if your income is more than expenses, it's a great opportunity to do this process again and figure out what's a need, what's a want, and how can we get this in a comfort level. Because comfort really at the end of the day is really what, you know, what we hope for in a budget that meets our needs, it's not causing us stress, and it's predictable. These are just the suggested budget guidelines. Everyone's a little different. I know with housing, for example, some say 30%, some say 20%, some say 25%. Really, it's up to you. But a general guideline, you know, 25% on housing, 15% on savings. Another big one that I've heard is 15% towards retirement savings, depending on what you're expecting for Social Security. But that really, at the end of the day, is up to you and what your comfort level is. But it's a good goal to shoot for. And maybe if you're not there right now, you can start with a small percentage, maybe even 1%, and every year up it until you are saving 10, 15%, whatever helps you get there. But that's a great goal to shoot for. Transportation, we see it a lot. Sometimes transportation can be a need, especially if you need a specific type of vehicle, such as all-wheel drive or a truck. But understanding how that fits into your budget. I know I made the mistake of buying way too much car. Last year I bought myself a really fancy 2013 Genesis Coupe. And when I initially got the car, the payment was only 8 or 9% of my budget. But what I didn't realize is how much that tires, brakes, and insurance on that car was going to cost me. It ended up costing me almost $500 a month to own that car, which was way more than 10% of my budget. You know, it doesn't look like a lot of you in here are in my age range, so I don't know that that's going to be a huge problem for everybody. But I see it a lot, you know, spending a lot of money on big trucks or that kind of stuff. And of course, that other category goes to, you know, expenses, cable, and that kind of stuff. Spending leaks. So the story that I wanted to tell you guys, we actually had a coworker. We travel a lot for work, and she felt that it was cheaper to pay for parking tickets than to pay for parking. Yeah, until you get a boot on your car. I don't think she ever got a boot on her car, but it's really interesting the things that we think might be costing us less. You know, all the way from a small example to unit cost at the store. You know how some tags, stores are putting more unit cost on tags these days, but a trick that I've noticed some of them recently are doing is they'll price one product price per unit and another product price per ounce and another product price per pound, and it makes, then you have to actually whip out your phone and calculate what the unit cost of what you're buying is, and that's just a small example, all the way up to, you know, the parking ticket example when you get late fees and whatnot. And I would even venture to say almost everybody has a spending leak. I'm not going to say everybody because I have a coworker who is the master of budgeting. But I have my spending leaks, and I have to be brutally honest with myself about what they are and how much I'm actually spending on things that maybe aren't needs. But you know, spending leaks, and this obviously is not a comprehensive list, but things that maybe you wouldn't do over again. The leftover food, I actually have a joke around my house. The second shelf on my fridge is where my leftovers go to die. Really bad about that. So just utilizing your money more responsibly, and things that you buy, and how you buy them, and maybe not necessarily what you buy, but buying it more efficiently, such as, you know, looking at unit costs and name brand versus store brand and that kind of stuff. Ways to reduce spending leaks, you know, be realistic of areas to cut back. Coffee's, I know people pick on coffee a lot, but there's lots of other ways to really look at this. Finding less expensive alternatives, and large spending leaks like debt. The example of the credit cards, and we were talking about what the average household has in credit card debt, it listed something in the 15,000 range when you take out people who do not carry a debt month to month. People who, when you calculate everybody that has a credit card and then average their balances, is about 7,600, something in that range. If someone were only to make close to minimum payments, like is it $80 or $100 a month, somewhere in there?
It's percentage,
but if you're just to make pretty close to minimum payments, it would take you, I mean, it's like 13 years to pay it off, and you end up paying double what you actually charge to the card to get it paid off. And that's why we talk about debt payments. I know that doesn't apply to everybody, but it's a massive spending leak, and creating a good budget that helps you get that paid off fast really saves you a lot of money in the end, if you are able to use these tactics. This is the principle I was telling you about. It's called the step-down principle. It's a general concept, but some of you might have heard of Dave Ramsey. He recommends something that's very similar, the snowball method. But the general idea is to organize your goals that you're trying to accomplish in a way that makes it easier to get your wins. And wins being when you get it paid off, or even if it's not debt, even if it's something else, such as a savings goal or whatever. When you organize them in a way that allows you to get one paid off and then keep going, it really helps you get momentum. There's two ways to tackle it when you're talking about debt. You can tackle it from the smallest debt up to the biggest debt, or if you're more of a numbers person, you can tackle it from the highest interest down to the lowest interest. It's up to you which way you prefer to go. I'm a numbers person, but a lot of people get a lot of success by starting with the small guys first, getting them paid off, and then moving on. To put it more into a chart perspective, just to kind of break it down with the same example, if you had four loans that you were looking to get paid off, you start step one with the smallest payment first. So on the very left here, the $80 a month, once you get that paid off, then you take that same $80 a month and apply it to the next smallest loan or next biggest loan. And so you haven't changed your budget, you haven't, you know, taken money from elsewhere to get more stuff paid down. You're just rearranging things to get things paid off with more momentum. So now on that account, instead of paying $120, you're paying $200 a month. Now you're really making some progress. Once that's paid off, then you double that up on your auto loan. Now you're nearly making double payments on your car, and you're really speeding things up. And then by the end, on the student loan, and this is one I'm really looking forward to, and why I'm getting my little credit card stuff taken care of, is so then I can tackle my student loans. Because by the end of it, you know, with this budget example, instead of paying $150 a month towards the student loan, with the same budget, not taking money away from anything else or making any cuts, you would now theoretically be paying $570 a month. That loan's going to get paid off quick. So, I mean, it's not a complicated concept per se, but a lot of people use it really effectively. So I hope this helps somebody in the room. But really, at the end of the day, make it work for you. No two budgets are the same. Everybody has different preferences. Everybody has different priorities. We all have different ideas of what a good budget is or isn't. And general guidelines don't work for everybody. So find a budgeting tool that works for you, whether that be paper or an application or online banking, whatever works for you. And make sure you use it, even if it's not every day, even if it's just once a month. I only get paid once a month, you guys, and it can be hard going from bi-weekly to once a month. But that one time of every single month, I sit down, I log into online banking first, I look at all of my accounts and make sure everything looks good, make sure all of my bills got paid last month, and then I sit down and plan all the bills for next month. And then I don't even have to think about it again until next month. Communicating with your support system, whether that be a significant other, or whether that be maybe friends. I know that when I switched gears from being kind of a young, crazy college student to settling down, I wanted to buy my first house, that kind of stuff. It was hard because a lot of my friends that are still stuck in that partying, going out, and I've never been much of a drinker anyways, but they're still stuck in that. They stopped inviting me to go do things because they thought I didn't want to hang out with them anymore, and that was my fault because I didn't communicate to them, you know, guys, I really want to hang out with you and spend time with you. I just don't want to be spending my money on going out to the neighborhood bar or going out to, you know, things that cost $40 to $60 a night. It's too expensive for me. So you guys go have fun, but why don't we do a picnic on Wednesday or whatever? You know, it's that kind of stuff. Just communicating to the people who are around you and the people who give you support what your goals are and kind of the why behind it. They'll be a lot more sympathetic, they'll be a lot more supportive, and in some cases they'll even give you an accountability buddy, which is an extra bonus. And then the last part of it is find extra motivation. I have a coworker who loves Disneyland, and so they put a little Disney sticker on their debit cards for the time. Every time they pull it out, they have to look at little Mickey and decide whether or not what they're buying is more important or, you know, fits in within their budget. Did you have a question? Okay, sorry, I thought I handed. Anyways. Once you've got your budget underway and you've set some goals to put your budget into action and your plan into action, you want to make sure that you're managing your system. And this goes back to having an adjustable budget. So life happens, no plan survives initial contact. So you'll want to make sure you continue to track your expenses. It doesn't have to be anything comprehensive. If you're not a person that likes to do this, you know, go through the whole process and write everything down and categorize everything, that's okay. But just finding a system that works, that you can continue to work on, and that's really what's important. Monitoring your accounts is a big one because I don't know if you guys have ever had a situation where you've been double charged for things, but when you aren't looking at your account history and someone double charges you, it's really hard to fix it, and that can be a spending leak right there, especially if an example that I had, and it's a small amount, but I had accidentally set up 2 Netflix accounts somehow, some way. So for like 2 years, they were taking out, I mean, it was like $12.99 out of my account. So 24 months, you know, that's a couple $100 that I wasn't paying attention. They're not going to refund me for 2 years of a Netflix account. So, and again, that's a small example, but it's the same idea that if you're not really paying that close attention, or in my case, if I'm not paying that close attention, it's a spending leak. You're leaving money on the table. I could have done lots of fun things with that money. So monitoring your accounts and just making sure everything looks good and matches your budget is important. Reviewing your goals to make sure that your goals are still setting you up to accomplish what you're looking to do. Say, for example, I decided racing is for crazy people and I don't want to do it anymore. I can totally shift my budget over to doing something else with that money. But just being flexible is important. And ensure that your tools are still working for you. For a long time, I was using the paper method, and it kind of stinks going back through it because everything's just scattered and handwritten, and I have a hard time reading my own handwriting. And I didn't even know for a long time that online banking tools were a thing. They were in a whole different tab, you know, and I didn't know about things like Mint or Intuit or that kind of stuff. I didn't know that existed. So for a couple of years I was handwriting everything, and then I just stopped completely. So just make sure that your tools are still working for you. You never know, there might be something bigger and better out there. You can even ask your financial institution, or if you have a family or friend, family member or friend who is really financially savvy, you can always ask them what they're doing. You never know, they might give you some good tips too. Pitfalls that can derail your spending plan. Spending leaks are more of a continuous thing. They're things that we do out of habit, or maybe out of just convenience. You know, it's more convenient to stop by the gas station and grab something on the way to work than it is to actually pack yourself a lunch. I experienced that a lot. But besides those things which are habitual, there's things that sometimes are completely out of our control. It doesn't matter how savvy you are with money, you can't stop from having a medical emergency. They happen. But the important thing is just to understand that that happens, and that's why we always recommend having an emergency savings, whether it be for medical emergencies or maybe for unexpected holiday surprises, repair bills, you know, the list goes on. There's lots of stuff that could happen. By having an emergency fund, you're preventing the situation where you find out, oh poop, I just ran over a screw, I can't repair my tire, and now I have to pull out my credit card to pay for it because I didn't have an emergency savings. There's a lot of businesses that actually give you cash discounts too, which is kind of a bonus, but allows your budget to stay on track, because the whole point of having an emergency fund is to use it if you need it. So if you have an emergency fund and an emergency pops up, don't be afraid to dig into it, because that's exactly what you have it for. A nice bonus, especially when interest rates are great, you get money on top of it. You know, if you can find a account that pays you some dividends for just leaving your money and letting it sit, it's a great benefit. So
yeah. So give me an example of where would be a good place to start. I mean, because savings accounts these days practically zero.
I hear you, and we're not exactly here to pitch it to you, but stapled in your packet is an example of a savings account that's great for an emergency savings. It pays 5% on the first $500. We are not the only financial institution that has those kinds of rates, but a place like that where you can put money, it's only on $500, but $500 is a great place to start, and 5% is not a rate to complain about, but that's a good place to start. Is something like that. If you obviously are putting away more than $500, which is a good thing, there are accounts that earn 2 to 5% APR, depending on what you're doing with it, and certificates or that kind of thing.
And
so
usually those things have penalties for withdrawals early.
They can. And this is a discussion that's kind of I can give you some good suggestions if you want to stay and ask me after. I think I can give you some recommendations that I think you'll like. So. But shopping around is a great thing to do. If you've got an emergency fund and you want to know or get an idea of what to do with it, look around, get creative. You don't have to keep it all in one place either. Make your money work for you. So resources, everything that's on the table for you is a gift. You can take it. There's a lot of information in there. If you're a note taker, you can take it home and write some notes down. We also have, for our members, we have free programs. One's called Balance, and it's a really comprehensive budgeting tool, ranging from everywhere from, I really need help to I'm doing well, but how can I do better? And the same with Money Coach, which is more of an interactive educational module that teaches you concepts really, really basic and in-depth. Home buying, retirement, setting up retirement accounts. I mean, there's just tons of stuff, even estate planning and that kind of thing. And it's all free for our members. Another kind of a side note too, you can reduce unsolicited or credit card invites and whatnot. And this is all in the packet that I gave you too. Does anyone have any questions? Is there any information that you really wanted to learn as far as budgeting that I didn't cover? Wonderful. Well, I really appreciate you guys coming. This has been fun, and this is such a fantastic turnout.